Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Welcome everyone, and welcome to my friend Peig Abbott. Peig, I'm so glad you're here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a gift. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So everybody, this is Peig Abbott. She's an internationally known and respected artist who bridges creativity, connection, and conscious awareness. Through her own journey of recovery from chronic illness and cancer, Peig has unveiled the profound impact of healing through art. Inspired through natural materials and global events, Peig is driven to provide alchemical creations and education for people to experience and engage with the art of illumination and transformation. If you really knew her, you'd know she's a woman who moves from the heart, and she's a woman who creates from the heart. Peig is a respected visual artist, a sculptor who works in natural materials, predominantly stone and clay. Her sculptures are what many refer to as literally the art of alchemy. So again, thanks for being here, and I'm just so excited for you to share with us a little bit about your journey and what led you to these sort of profound awarenesses about art and healing.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful intro, and I'm thrilled to be able to share with you and everyone who's tuning in to hear about the healing power of art. I'm pretty excited to share it. And I guess when I'm talking about, that healing power of art, I'm not talking just about art therapy. I'm talking about that place where we begin a conversation within, right? That dialogue that starts with ourselves, expands to our friends, our family, and ultimately our community. And I say this because it's a kind of a gateway to begin to bring awareness, to bring understanding, and awaken to the transformation that we're able to have individually, but also globally. So thank you.
Yeah. I wonder if you wouldn't begin by just telling us a little bit about what sort of put you on this path.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey. Ultimately, my story begins with navigating healing through chronic fatigue and cancer. In 1993, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and that was at a time when chronic fatigue wasn't known. It was kind of that place where a lot of the medical profession was at a loss about trying to understand it, define it, explain the physical components of what contributes to it, how to heal from it. And so it was a really, really dark place to be in, because there were so many unknowns, so many questions unanswered, and it was, the beginning of a hell for me. A trip out of bed for the day was a trip to the bathroom, and I don't say that lightly. It was, I spent months in bed, and the stucco on the ceiling became my friends in a way, and it was at a place where, I was physically, emotionally, mentally starting to kind of disappear. Through whatever force, I started picking up a pen, a pencil, and just putting that to paper, and started writing. I started doodling. I started drawing. And that when I look back at my journey through art as healing, that was the place where it began for me. That was the pivotal place where I started to find a place where I had and could make sense of something. Even if it was just this random doodle, it took me to that place of the present moment where I knew that that present moment was safe, it was real, it was whole, and it was something that I could, I guess, grab onto to feel alive. And 5 years later, 1999, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and it was, you know, thyroid cancer, from my knowledge, is one of the safer cancers to have. It went into my lymphatic, so I knew that it was a little bit more, but it was still kind of a card that I was dealt that really shocked me. And you know, it was a combination between the chronic fatigue and the cancer that made me realize that the journey of healing through art was actually, it was art that actually saved my life. And, you know, somewhere between the diagnosis of cancer and chronic fatigue and cancer, I started, you know, shifting the pen and pencil from paper to exploring pastels and paints. But I got rid of anything besides my hands to work with. And again, it was bringing me back into the body of that present moment. And then eventually somebody recognized that I was using these mediums with my hands and brought me some clay to work with. Before that, it didn't even cross my radar to work in clay. And it was actually clay that really resonated with me because I'm so tactile. It resonated to a place where I could then work the energetics of that natural material, absorbing it within myself to be able to, again, bring me back to present, bring me back to working the body or elements, and just starting to create. And there's more I want to say about that, but ultimately, and I will, ultimately, I want to say that with, you know, the dark card of cancer that I was dealt, I recognized that I had a choice. You know, I alluded to earlier where that spark in my life was just kind of starting to dissolve. It wasn't there. And so being dealt that card, it was like, okay, I have a choice. I could live, or I could keep perpetuating the flame being extinguished. And I chose to live. I quit my job. I was working a job that was like 60+ hours a week. And then that was when I started bringing art into my life more. And I say art, I mean also creativity. So art and creativity kind of as a whole. And I recognize that when I was working the clay, it became a source of meditation and joy for me, where that became a gateway to start exploring the self on a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual level, to ultimately be able to then have that conversation with myself to stimulate change within. Stimulating that change within helps to stimulate change outside. And that journey, and I'll explain as we go on, it just makes me understand that it's not, when I say art as a healing process, I'm not just talking about us as creators, I'm also talking about us as viewers of art. And it's just such a profound way for us to begin that dialogue for change.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I can imagine a lot of people who are listening to this, some of them might be in the position you were in back in 93, you know, lying in their bed, not able to move, not able to even imagine picking up a piece of paper and a pencil or knowing what even how to begin to do anything with it. It seems like the inroad of viewership might be a place for people to start. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe the best way is for me to share a little bit of some slides that I put together, just so that people have a visual to kind of work with.
Perfect.
If you're okay with that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think let's begin with the whole idea where we have these myths and stories that we move around with in life, these stories of who we are, habits of how we, you know, we speak or we act or we treat ourselves, we treat others. And a lot of these stories and these myths are distorted. They're not necessarily, they don't serve ourselves. They don't serve the greater good. And I guess through, you know, my whole exploration with art, it becomes a place where all of a sudden we're able to see clearly that journey into ourselves and our global community to create a vast, expansive, luminous place where we can start to change. We can start to transform who we are. And so as a viewer and a creator, it's that dialogue that is, you know, connecting us. So again, you know, let's going back to the clay. It was an instrument of healing for myself, but I also understood that these forms, these creations that viewers see in the world are actually instruments of healing for the viewer. And I say that specifically because I've experienced this. I've experienced this as a creator receiving comments from viewers, but also as someone viewing, you know, the art forms. And I mentioned that in, like, I say that in two-dimensional, like paintings, sculpture, however you want to explain it. So in 2003, I was invited to have my very first solo exhibition. And it taught me the power of art. And it taught me how art is a mirror. It's a mirror to our inner self. It's a reflection of who we are, our judgments, our patterns of thinking. It's a reflection of our emotions at the time that we're viewing it. And it, you know, to take it one step further, it stimulates every sensory aspect that we have. And it's the story of Remnants that revealed this to me. So this is an installation. It was only temporary. It doesn't exist today, only in the fact that the clay still exists. It's unfired, so that means that I can recycle and reuse it. And this is a larger than life figure, probably about 20% larger in size than you and I. And I housed it in a gallery space where all the lights are off except one blue light that shone just to the side of the head of the figure. And so this became a very sacred space for people to come and view. It is a section of a tree The tree form came down from a hurricane that went through. This exhibit took place in Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the eastern coast of Canada. And so it became a conversation about embracing nature, kind of that nature nurture thinking, and so much more. So again, a larger than life figure wrapped around a natural, it kind of, you know, invokes a lot of our human connection, right? Human connection with who we are, the earth, and that element. And I made it so that it was very, very true to form, true to scale, very, very real, if you want to say. So this next slide just kind of shows that essence of that blue light. It became this very dark, sacred space. And so when I was present with this, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, wow, this was such an amazing experience. It made me want to cry. It made me feel so embraced and loved. I wanted to sit with it. I wanted to kind of hang out. It was a very safe place to be able just to kind of be. And then I had something else happen to me, which shocked me. And I had someone come up to me and say, you know, word from word, I felt so angry, I had to leave. And again, I mean, that shocked me. It made me take a step back and go, whoa, what's going on here? And I realized that that is the place where art becomes our mirror. It becomes a reflection of what we're going through, or what we're thinking, or, you know, what might have happened 10 minutes earlier where we haven't processed. And for me, that was a magical understanding that that is the key to be able to then connect and transform ourselves and the way the world works on a larger scale, right? I did a second installation of this. So as I mentioned, it is unfired clay. And I recycled the clay and made it into a second form. But before I go into that, this is just a scale. This just shows you the scale of the work. So again, that's me sitting beside the figure in the gallery. The second form, it again interacts with nature in some way. I'm very keen on working with the natural elements and invoking a lot of feelings related to the earth and how we move. But this, again, was housed in a gallery where, again, that blue light shining down, not necessarily on the figure this time, but on the tree. And so again, just kind of moving in. And the same thing happened. The same thing where people would come in and see this form, and depending on when they would come into the gallery, because it's unfired, it actually starts to crack and decay over time, which is one of the intentions behind this work. So again, it's stimulating a lot of different senses, so that you see, you know, the crack in the arm, or, you know, the crack and the drying of the fingers. They're that kind of lighter color. Eventually they fall off and they fall apart. And so again, it becomes this like strange way of interacting with this work, invoking a different connection to it, depending on when you see it. Again, there's that blue light shining down just on that. So again, it becomes a sacred place for viewers to interact and in a way feel safe, but also vulnerable to be able to kind of take that, a little bit of that deeper dive within themselves. And this is just a detail of the fingers. As you can see, they are cracking and they're starting to dry and crack over time. And this again is just in scale, but it gives you a greater sense of what's happening. This is at the very end of the installation where some of the fingers have fallen off, the cracks in the arms are a lot more significant, and bringing you to a different place. So that was the journey for me, the beginning of understanding how art is that reflection for where and where we are. And over time, I started to move from clay and explore stone as a medium to work with. And through that, I learned so much about honoring and celebrating the medium. The mediums that I work are a complete, they mirror back to me where I am, because if I all of a sudden am sculpting, I'm carving the stone, and I start to become impatient, stone is a very, very, it's a material that is not easy to carve, right? It doesn't move fast. And so if all of a sudden I'm becoming impatient, it's not the stone that's impatient, it's me. And so why am I being impatient? And so I start to learn to understand myself through the process of creating, using these natural based materials. And I believe I'm not a painter, but I would understand and have spoken to painters that their process is very similar, in that it becomes a reflection to where and who they are in that moment. And of course, exploring different tools and techniques to shape the stone, to work with the stone, and to honor the stone as well. So my forms that I work are both realistic, they're figurative, and they're also abstract. So I get to explore ways of invoking different emotions, different senses from people, in kind of how they interact with my work. And just moving through these slides relatively quickly, I feel like each one, no matter whether or not it's figurative or if there's something that's a little bit more abstract, everyone has a different response, similar response and different response in terms of working with the message that they're viewing while also internalizing how they're viewing it. So they're working with that kind of standpoint of where they are. And it could be their response of the raw stone versus the polished surface, and how that invokes different vulnerabilities versus that polished face that we show the world. Yeah, so at the end of the day, I'll say that ultimately I'm working with these materials to create these forms, but when the gloves are off, I step out of the way. Like, the process of creating is one where I have to step out of the way, because if I project too much of my my internal dialogue, it just becomes conflicted. And that's where, I spoke earlier about the idea of putting that pen to paper when I was so sick at that time, was the only place that I knew was real. It brought me to that present moment. And it's the same process with creating, is it forces me back into that present moment of being, of connecting with kind of that source energy that we can then be able to work with on a physical level, on a mental level, emotional level, and spiritual level. And I guess, you know, in starting to kind of close, it's just the forms, or how what do I want to say? It's just that ability to see the light and the dark, what we choose to see and how we choose to see it is ultimately our own journey with whatever and however we're interacting with that art or that form of creativity. But it is that gateway. It is where the door opens for you then to be able to investigate yourself, and have that conversation, have that dialogue on that individual level and that collective level to be able to transform. And again, just that raw versus that polished edge and what we share with the world. So that's a little bit about me and my journey. And just recognizing that, you know, art and creativity can be one of those magical tools in your toolbox to create a fundamental change.
I love that. And there's so many pieces in this that resonated with me. One of the things that I'm struck by is the beginning of the story where you shared you were in your bed, you know, unable to move and really only able to maybe crawl to the bathroom once a day. And then at the end, you're like ripped and like wielding these giant machines and taking on huge, you know, I can imagine some people who are at the first part of that journey right now going, what the heck? How do I get to that? How do I get there? You know? Well, and so one option you gave was sort of this mind shift of, you know, how do you engage in this process of your illness as a creator, right? How do you reclaim the sovereign power of decision making, you know, choose to live and choose to take steps in the direction of life? But what are the practical things, like picking up a piece of paper and a pencil? Are there any things, any caveats to be aware of for people who are eager to invoke that kind of creative side and to bring forth those, you know, to journey in that way, like you did for yourself and your own healing? What sort of things do people need to be aware of before they do that?
Well, I think, you know, certainly, you know, lifting heavy stones and tools aren't necessarily what I'd recommend to start with. Yeah, for sure. It was a journey to get from that bed to, you know, being able to play with some really big, beautiful stones and tools. And what I'd recommend is just to start somewhere. Start in a place where it's gentle for you physically and that it isn't difficult, because if it's difficult, we tend to say, oh, this is too hard, I'm going to push it away. And one thing I do want to say about that is that there's a huge myth out there that everyone's not creative. If you're human, you are creative. You are born to create. We create every day, and we don't know it. It's about understanding what that creativity looks like is what matters. And it might not be, you know, in the form of quote unquote visual art. It might be in the form of, you know, building, you know, tables, or, you know, taking photographs, or any, like writing, poetry, music, anything that's creative. You know, and to go back to your question is where people start. What I'd suggest is ask themselves, where is the resonance? You know, what resonates with you to be able to explore. And I guarantee that that resonance will guide you to explore all these different other things. And one thing that I found is that when you get into that place of surrender with being in that present moment and putting that pen to paper, all of a sudden time disappears. And you could be spending hours just doing this one thing. And, you know, over time, I recognize that in that place where I couldn't get out of bed in the morning versus spending 5 hours carving, it is that place where it's almost like the body, or the concept of the body, and the barriers that we put on to our physical selves disappears. It disappears. And my understanding, and I'm not a doctor, but I believe that there is a healing that's happening on a cellular level when we get into that place.
Well, I want to say one thing about what you just said, which is that in the same way that a lot of people reject the notion that they are artists, I believe we are all doctors.
Nice.
I believe we all have an innate ability to heal ourselves. And taking ownership of that project is one of the main steps to getting well.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to have a degree on your wall to understand how eating gluten makes you feel, or to understand what your body feels like, or what happens to your spirit when you spend an hour singing or listening to a beautiful performance or looking at art, right? We're paying attention to data points all the time. And to the degree that we actually pay attention to those awarenesses and bring them to light, I think we can make a lot of really informed decisions about how to heal ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully put. Beautifully. Yeah.
So this has been illuminating. Before we end, is there anything else that we need to bring light to, or anything else that you would want to share from your heart with this audience of people who are maybe suffering, maybe looking for some words of hope or wisdom? What else would you say?
You know, I think just to be able to leave listeners with the idea that, you know, that you are born to create, that not only that, but you're born to play, you know, that play and that ability to just get away from all the, you know, lack of confidence. Oh, I can't create, I'm not a good artist or whatever, those stories, they are there to keep us small. And it's the play, bringing the play into our life, into our worlds, to be able to kind of just be joyful and celebrate whatever we're doing, will help, you know, release a lot of those bounded up concepts that we have. And, you know, I chatted about the resonance earlier, and I just want to say, embrace it, embrace the resonance, and listen to what it has to share with you. Connect within, because there's a huge amount of story of conversation that can happen through that resonance. And it all begins with that simple conversation.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for this conversation. It's been lovely.
Thank you. Yeah. And I feel so blessed to be able to share, you know, not only my own story, but what I've recognized in, you know, the healing power of art. So thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.